My client is a 44-year-old female, and she works as a project manager for one of the country's largest banks, and she's divorced, and this was several years ago before she moved here, and she doesn't have any children. She relocated to Asheville, where I live, 3 or 4 years ago from Maine because she was tired of being isolated, and her job is still a work-from-home situation as it was in Maine. We are very close friends, and she's also one of my hormone balancing clients, so we have sort of a dual relationship. She's had some recent health problems and issues with perimenopause, and that's what we're working on together with the hormone balancing. Of note, these had just been diagnosed at the time she took the profile. And in the last year, she's changed her work team at her request and finds herself bored with what she's doing, but not wanting to move to the next level in her work because of the demands it would place on the balance she has in her life, and we'll actually talk more about that at the end. She would like very much to be in a relationship, although she's uncertain about, because of her divorce, she's a little wary of that. And I asked her if she would like to take the profile just basically so she could start to get some clarity around what she's wanting for herself as she looks ahead. And she really enjoys any kind of opportunity to increase her self-awareness. So I asked her to take this, and I'll just say now that we didn't have a chance to discuss the expert legend in our debriefing, but I'm planning to do that at the end of this week with her. So what stood out to me right away on her profile was the balance of her clarity and focus in her outer world. So she's very strong and even in all of her dimensions, and then her focus is very, very even as well. On a second look, what stood out to me was her internal extrinsic, and this dimension was somewhat weaker than the other two to the extent that because of the gap, it looked like that might be an area of thinking that she might tend to skip over. And I also noted that her focus was greater than her clarity in this area. So when I spoke with her, which was actually just last week, the first thing she noticed, in her words, was the gap on her success orientation. And the way she said it, I asked her if that had a negative connotation for her, and she said it did. And so I did explain to her again that this was just a snapshot in time, and that the bars represent clarity in a certain area, and that the diamonds are concentration, and there's no real good or bad here. There's not a lot of judgment around that. It just is what it is. So after talking about this some more, it made sense to her given her uncertainty about her career with the bank. This bank has large layoffs from time to time, so there's always sort of that background uncertainty, and then also with the boredom that she's experiencing in the role that she currently has. And then she has also the uncertainty of being in a relationship and what she's wanting with that. And then she also has an overvaluing of the concentration in this dimension, so even though she doesn't have a lot of clarity, she is trying to figure it out. She then went to the internal intrinsic area and noted her low diamond, and this gave me a chance to talk about the average scores in the U.S. and the way that most of us are raised to, put others ahead of ourselves, and so that her score was actually right on target with an average score in the United States. And she discussed her recent issues with her health and that she's now trying to focus more on self-care, so it would be interesting to see how this looks in a few months. She also talked about how she had no boundaries when it came to people, and that she would easily sacrifice her own needs in order to help someone else. And just in my friendship with her, I know that to be very true. Then we looked at page 6, and what really stood out to her was in her external extrinsic, she really goes into do mode, as evidenced by what happens when her clarity goes to 100 in that area. And I asked her, about that, and she stated that she's the person that everybody comes to when there's a fire drill in her work setting, because she's so easily able to see the necessary steps that need to be taken and to mobilize herself and everybody else to get a job done under pressure. There's a slight overvaluing in the extrinsic systemic under stress, whereas it is more balanced when she's not under stress. And she says she's very able to handle stressful situations with a cool head, which is interesting because in her internal world, there is not nearly the clarity and balance that there is in her external world. In her internal world under stress, her clarity and her concentrations essentially remain the same as they do in her everyday life. So, you know, it was interesting to me, as good of friends as we are, I think I don't know her as well as I thought I did, because what came up in the expert legend, you know, I know it's just not about the numbers, but I was really struck by the number of weak scores that she had on her internal side, which indicate a high level of internal stress. So her DIM, her DIM-P, her DI, her INT-P, her SQ scores were all indicative of somebody who is under a great deal of stress and really has some difficulty valuing herself correctly. It appears that she really doesn't think about herself, and she'll be the first one to say that. But when she does, she doesn't really value herself correctly, as indicated by her SQ score. Her DI indicates that she tends to just push problems to the side. And so this stress, which you really don't get any of when you're just talking to her, is playing itself out health-wise with a situation of adrenal fatigue, which is something else that we're working on. Her internal extrinsic indicates an overvaluing of concentration on her role. So again, as I said before, she is trying to figure things out. And her BQA is out of balance, so there is a lack of harmony between her inner and outer worlds. And what has been really helpful is that when I did this debriefing with her, she then went off to a 4-day coaching retreat. She wants to become a coach, and she went to this retreat with a group of women and had a chance to do some coaching around some of the issues that had come up in this profile. And what she's realized, and she told me this in a conversation yesterday, is that her self-talk, she believes herself to be, quote-unquote, a mess and in need of rescue or help, and she's able to start seeing that this is not true. So the issue with her career and not wanting to move ahead, apparently, as she has been able to tease more of this out, doesn't really relate to the lack of balance that it would create in her life. That's the story she's telling herself in order to avoid taking on more responsibility and really putting herself out there more. So it'll be interesting to sit down with her to review the expert legend in the next few days so that we can finish our discussion and get some reaction from her on her thoughts now that she's had a chance to have this retreat experience and really experience the issues that came up in the profile more deeply. So that's my client.